Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Raw to Rageous. I'm Bobby, and this is part 6 of This Will Change the Way You Hunt Forever. This is one of those videos that's going to bring a number of other things together as I draw out some of the things that we've been talking a little bit about in pieces along the way. So, in this video, we're going to talk about the lunar cycle as a whole and how it plays into being able to take things like this and that up there. So let's get going. All right, everybody, so you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. I am drawing and I am recording at the same time, so I'm going to try to do this the best that I can for you. This is part 6, as I mentioned just a second ago, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to identify that there are 2 different cycles that come into play. One is a lunar cycle, and one is a solar cycle. So we all pretty well know that that's the sun. We've got a number of different phases, but the 2 most important are the new moon and the full moon. Now this happens about 28 days between each one of them. Same thing here. Okay, so every 28 days there's going to be a new moon. Now the last one that happened just a couple of days ago on September 28th, 2019. And we're going to hold off on this for a while. We're not going to focus on that just yet, but we will get there. So the new moon happens every 28 days, which is going to put it at the end of October, November, and December. Okay. Now, the most important new moon that we have when it concerns deer hunting is this one right here, the November new moon. And we're going to talk about why that is here in just a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take this pen and I'm going to say that this is midnight of a given 24-hour day. All right, and this is midnight on the other end. Now, I mentioned in one of the videos not too awful long ago that the moon takes about 24.5 to 25 hours to get to the exact same position that it was in the day before. So this solar cycle, this 24-hour cycle, midnight to midnight, is not going to be exactly the same as the lunar cycle, but it's going to give us a little bit of a close illustration of what we're looking for. In every 24-hour cycle from midnight to midnight, there are 4 key positions of the moon that are relevant to what we're doing. And we've talked about those in the previous parts. Now, one of them is going to be the lunar transit. One of them is going to be the underneath position. One of them is going to be the rise. And one of them is going to be the set. Okay? Those are what we're looking for. All right, so I've changed the order up just a little bit. Right here you can see that I have written rise, transit, set, and underneath. These are lunar positions in every 24.5 to 25-hour cycle. This is solar midnight to solar midnight over the course of a 24-hour period right here. We're going to see that in the rise position, right there, we're going to see activity on either side of the rise of about a half an hour to 45 minutes of that time when the moon actually crests over the eastern horizon. Now, several hours later, we're going to see the lunar transit. There's a little bump right there that was accidental. We're not really looking at the curve so much as we are the amplitude between the curves and when they're positioned. So the moon is going to rise, and it really doesn't matter what time of the solar day it is right now. Just know that we've got about a half hour to 45 minutes of activity on either side of the moon rise. Several hours later, we're going to have an hour to 2 hours on either side of the lunar transit position. Here, several hours later still, we're going to get into the lunar set, or the moon set, and we're going to have another half hour to 45 minutes of activity on either side of that time. And then finally, underneath, we're going to have an hour to 2 hours, sometimes a little bit less than that, whenever the moon is positioned directly underneath our physical position. So completely opposite the Earth from the transit position when it's directly overhead. Now these arrows right here indicate that in every 24-hour solar cycle, this peak and this peak and this peak and this peak will shift backwards, meaning it's going to take half an hour to 45 minutes to an hour longer to get the moon to be in the exact same position the subsequent day. Now we're going to marry this up with something else. And this is month, but not a 30-day month. This is more like a 28-day lunar month. Okay? In this 28-day lunar month, we're going to have a full moon at some point. We're going to have a new moon at some point when it's completely dark facing the Earth. And then we're going to have the portions between. And those may or may not be backwards. It really doesn't matter. This right here is what we're looking at. And this right here is what we're looking at. The new moon, that one. And the full moon, that one. So we said that the most recent one happened September 28th. This September 28th new moon is very, very important because it signals when the rut is going to take place, which will be the second new moon after the September new moon, which is going to be late November. And when I say it's going to signal the rut, what I mean by that is that the core, the heavy portion of the rut will occur very, very close to that second new moon after the September new moon. Now this date right here is going to change from year to year to year. And that's going to cause this moon right here, this new moon right here, to change year after year after year. But those are not only predictable, they're known. And that's the really cool part about all of this. So what I want to point out right now is that this right here is about a 14-day cycle. Makes sense? 28 days from end to end, 14 days between the full moon and the new moon. That's going to be important because this activity right here that happens every 24.5 to 25 hours is going to happen every 24 to 25.5 hours in here, and here, and here, and here, and here, over the course of that 14 days right there. So this shift that we're talking about right here is going to constantly be moving what's happening here in each of these days. Now, don't draw a correlation between that right there. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that lunar transit is going to happen somewhere in that 24.5 to 25-hour cycle. It's going to happen somewhere in here, and somewhere in here, and somewhere in here, and somewhere in here, and so on. Just like it's going to happen every day until we get through this 28-day window of lunar phases. Now what I'm showing here is the sequence of events that happens with the various new moons between September and December. I've already mentioned that the core of the rut is going to happen immediately around the November new moon, and the timing of that is going to change from year to year. Now what happens at the September new moon is the fall equinox. Once the fall equinox happens, then the days begin to get shorter. The days getting shorter and the weather changing and the seasons changing, the temperatures falling, it causes a number of things to happen with the deer. The bachelor groups that we've been seeing all summer long begin to break up, and they really begin to break up and start cruising before we get to the October new moon. Now this is when some of the does are going to come into estrus and the bucks will begin breeding. Now between the October new moon and the November new moon, there's going to be a ramp up in that rutting activity, but the does will not typically come in until they're around this new moon window, and I'll talk about the new moon window here in just a moment. But this right here is when things get really exciting, as we all know. Now, there are some does that don't get bred until the December new moon time window or time frame. They weren't bred here, they weren't bred here, they just weren't ready, and they come into cycle right there. So this is going to be key. We're going to talk about this window of time right now. What I've illustrated right here is that when there's a new moon, the most recent one, as we've said a couple of times now, happening the 28th of September, what we're going to see is that the deer activity is going to ramp up in the days preceding it, and it's going to slowly trail off in the days following it. Now, when we get into October and when we especially get into November, this is going to really, really ramp up, and we're going to see that rutting activity go crazy. So if we want to hit the core timing of activity within a 28-day lunar cycle, then this new moon becomes a key player, because the majority of the deer activity is going to happen right here in this 6 or 7 days. So if we can time the lunar positioning in the sky with this new moon and the activity that ramps up here, we're going to be super excited because we're going to be seeing a lot of deer activity. All right, so what I'm showing right here is that if we take 4 consecutive calendar days, now I'm not talking about the new moon right now, but if we take 4 consecutive calendar days, day 1, 2, 3, and 4, what we're going to see, if we hypothetically say that on day 1, the transit, the lunar transit, the moon being directly overhead, happens about noon, it's going to be around 1 o'clock shortly before that on day 2. It's going to be another half an hour to an hour after that on day 3, and another half an hour to an hour later than that on day 4. So here is the rotation of the clock that I've referred to in a couple of the videos. It's going to take the moon 24.5 to 25 hours to get into the exact same position in the sky. Directly overhead, directly overhead, directly overhead, directly overhead. Likewise, the moon rise and the moon set, which would be somewhere over in here, is going to change as well. So the rise is going to happen approximately 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. So if this is the core period, if this is the core period of movement, if this is a key period of movement, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, then the times that I want to be in my tree stand or blind are going to change as well. Now what happens is that typically deer hunters will go out into the woods in the morning, and they'll stay out till 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and they'll come in for several hours, and they'll head back out about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, if this is what's happening, then doing that is not going to see any productivity in deer movement on day 5 at daybreak. It's not going to happen because the moon rise has already occurred, and the position when the moon is underneath is going to be down in here somewhere before daybreak. This is going to happen and happen and happen again. So if we can time all of this, correlate it with the new moon cycle, and that -5 to 0 to +5 range of days, then we're going to put ourselves in a position to really see a lot of deer and increase our chances of taking good quality animals. So what I have right here are the new moon dates. So October 28th, 2019, that's when I expect the early rut window to be in play. November 27th through 28th, that's when I expect the core or the majority of the rut activity, that window, to be in play. And then December 26th through 27 and the 4 or 5 days on either side of that, that's when I expect the post-rut activity to be accelerated, when the does that haven't been bred already come into cycle again and they're bred at that time. Now you can see my note right up here. If I'm going to plan vacation, I will almost always plan some of my deer hunting days. In fact, the vast majority of the days that I actually use for deer hunting will happen within those windows. Now the really cool thing about the state of Oklahoma right now is that the November new moon happens right in the center of rifle season. The October new moon happens right in the center of muzzleloader season. And the December 26th through 27th new moon happens right in the middle of the holiday deer hunt that they have here for doe management. Now the reason I point this out like this is that when I'm following or tracking the moon's position in the sky, I don't have to worry about the moon's position every day of a 28-day lunar month. I really am going to spend the majority of my efforts focusing on where that moon is positioned in these 10 to 11 days, and these 10 to 11 days, and these 10 to 11 days. And if the transit happens during the daytime, then I'm going to focus the majority of my attention right there within these 11 days, these 11 days, these 11 days. And what I'm honestly going to do, and I'm just going to be honest with you, is I'm going to focus on the front end, because this is a ramp up. And this is going to taper. That's going to taper off. So this is where this is where deer get keyed up leading up to this new moon window right here. Now I've made some notes right here, and one of the things that I want to share with you is the argument that a lot of hunters will throw out there when it comes to deer season. They'll say something like, you know, deer season only lasts 3 to 4 months, and the rest of the year I'm doing something else, and I need to focus as much time as I can out in the woods so that I maximize my opportunities to take an animal. Well, and the argument there is that I can't shoot something if I'm not out in the woods. Well, that may be true, but if you plan appropriately, given what I've shared here, you're going to be able to spend a lot more time at home, or a lot more time engaged in wholesome recreational activities, I'll call them, and you'll be able to maximize your productive time out in the field. It is true you can't shoot something if you're not out, but if you plan when you're out, you're going to be better off. So how many times have we seen this statement right here on t-shirts and bumper stickers? There's an imbalance. We interrupt this marriage or this family to bring you the deer season. It doesn't have to be that way. While that's funny, a lot of people experience that, and by the time you get into November, when the core of the rut is happening in most places, then the family or the marriage has been fatigued because of all of the attention that's placed in October. So this argument right here in contrast, well, you're gone all the time. Well, you don't have to be gone all the time if you do this, like we've been talking about here. Understand, it's very important to understand that half of the month is going to be unproductive sit time if you're the typical hunter. Meaning, if you're going out in the morning at daybreak and you're sitting out there for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and then you come in for several hours in the middle of the day, then go right back out late in the afternoon, 2:30, 3 o'clock, and sit until it gets dark again, you're not going to be coinciding with that lunar movement across the sky. In fact, if we follow the reality that every new moon on either side of that, plus or minus 5 days, is going to be the core period of every 28-day lunar month, then literally 2/3 of every 28 days is going to be far less productive than the 10 days or 11 days that we're talking about. So if we will plan accordingly, we'll be able to spend family time. We won't always be gone in the morning. We won't always be gone in the evening. We will be able to do a whole lot of other things and be able to maximize our opportunities out in the field by being there when the deer are there. Now, it's true. They're going to eat, they're going to feed, and they're going to move around, and they're going to do it every 24 solar hours. But the activity level is going to be dramatically different inside this plus or minus 5 days of the new moon period. So this unproductive time right here that we're talking about is not going to play into how we hunt. Now what I've done right here is identify, at least for where I'm located, and your location is not going to be too awful different from this, but where I'm located in the state of Oklahoma, then the transit time, the lunar transit time on October 23rd, this is the plus or minus 5 days that we were talking about. This right here, the 28th, is the new moon in October, the new moon in November, so minus 5 days with the lead up in 5 days and the plus 3 or 4 days right there. So on October 23rd, the lunar transit is going to happen at 9:14 a.m. At 10:09 a.m. on the 24th, 11:03 a.m. on the 25th, and so on. Now this block right here represents those days and the lunar transit times when the majority of hunters are not going to be in their blinds, or they're not going to be in their tree stands, because it's after 10 o'clock or 10:30 in the morning, and it's before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's going to be a period of 5 days right here when most people who hunt are not even going to be out because they're not concerned about this. So this right here is going to be the core period of activity on those dates. Now right here also I've noted that the rise, the lunar rise, will occur approximately 5.5 to 6.5 hours before this time right here. Now there's going to be a small bump in activity there. We've talked about that before in this video. In November, this is the core rut window. This is key. Again, there's a block of about 5 days right here when the lunar transit, that period of 1.5 to 2 hours on either side of the transit time, the activity is going to be at its absolute highest. It's going to happen right in the center of the day, when people are going to be having their lunch, or they're going to be checking on the football games, or they're going to be checking on the Thanksgiving Day parade, or who cares, whatever. This is going to be a very, very key time. Now, I'm not saying don't spend time with your family. You need to do that. But what I want to point out is, if I know the transit is not going to happen until noon on the 26th of October, and I don't really have a need to, at least that's my assessment, on that particular day, if I don't feel like I have a need to be out there when the rise happens, because it's only in half an hour to 45 minutes before that, then why would I not sleep in on one of these days and go out in the center of the day, come back, and I have the evening to spend with my family? Because anytime after, in this case on the 28th, anytime after about 3 p.m. is really not going to, well, 4 p.m. I guess. 4 p.m. to dark is really not going to be productive time. But how valuable would that be to my children, or how valuable would that be to my spouse, or to those people who are depending on me at different activities for church or school or whatever it is that I'm involved with? That's going to be key. So if I can give a little on days like that, then those days that I want to be out here on days like this, or even early in the morning, people are going to be a lot more receptive to that. This is why this video series is titled, "This Will Change the Way You Hunt Forever," because you're able to schedule your day, and you're able to schedule your productive time in the field, and amazing things will happen. Now, I mentioned this in an earlier video, talking about my dad and how for years and years and years, he and I were tracking this. He was doing it before I was doing it, before we started collaborating on it a couple of decades ago. He would follow that lunar transit time, and he would look at his watch an hour and a half or 2 hours before it was supposed to happen, sometimes 2.5, and he'd say to my brothers and I, "Boys, it's time to go on a meat run." And we would get up, and it was a trigger statement for us. We would get up and we'd go get dressed, and we'd get in the car and we'd drive to our hunting location. And many, it was crazy how many times Dad would shoot an animal that very time. In fact, I distinctly remember a time when he went out with one of my younger brothers and said, "Boys," and he named him this time. He didn't say boys, he named him, and he said, "It's time to go on a meat run." And they went out, and an hour and a half to 2 hours later, they were back at the house because they had already dropped an animal. They got up in the tree. They were there 10 minutes. This buck walked out. My brother shot him. They got down out of the tree, took care of the animal, brought him home. It was crazy. And I've seen that happen so many times, I can't even count them. I just wrote on here that there's one more bonus, and that is this: when the sun position and the moon position coincide, it is explosive. And what I mean by that is the activity tends to be unbelievable. Here's an example. When the sun is directly overhead and the moon is directly overhead, it is unbelievable how crazy the activity can be, because the gravitational pull from the sun combined with the gravitational pull from the moon has a tremendous effect on this deer pattern and this deer movement. When the rise happens and the sunrise when the sunrise happens and the lunar rise happens at the same time, same thing. If you were to compare that with other days on a lunar rise, it's not even close to the same. It's ridiculously incredible. So bonus. When the sun position and the moon position coincide, the activity is explosive. So that's part 6 of This Will Change the Way You Hunt Forever. I promise you, if you will do these things that have been outlined in each of these parts, but most especially in this one right here, you will have a season like you have never had before. And your family and those vested parties in your life will appreciate you far more if you can stick to your guns on the timing of all of this. Now, I know it's tough. I recognize that. I went through periods where I tried to test it myself, and it was tough because I wanted to be out in the woods. Because if you're not out in the woods, you can't shoot anything, right? Well, if you're out in the woods when it's not productive, it's not productive. So, having said that, if you haven't done it yet, drop us a like, drop us a subscribe, send this out to your friends, get them to sign up too. And that way, that will enable us to push out the content to your visibility and to theirs a lot easier and a lot faster. So with that, have a great season. We'll talk more about deer hunting, obviously, and everything else that we do here on Raw to Rageous. As the days pass, as we've said before, we really appreciate you watching and look forward to seeing you again. So with that, we're going to call this a wrap, and we'll see you next time.